Hi and welcome to this first video about terrain making, and today we're gonna talk about planning your table. For this I'm gonna use three different rulebooks. I'm gonna use the DBA rulebook, the Pike&Shotte rulebook from Warlord Games, and my favorite, the Battlegroup rules from Plastic Soldier Company. The first thing that you always start with is, of course, figuring out what rule system you're gonna play and to what scale. For example, Battlegroup is basically a scaleless rule set, so it's written more or less for 15 to 20 millimeter miniatures, but you can use 6 to 28 millimeter miniatures quite comfortably without changing any of the rules. The Pike&Shotte rules, mainly 28 millimeters, and the DBA is mainly 15. So let's dive into the rules and see what we have. So going from right to left, we have the most rigid terrain rules, somewhere in the middle, and the least rigid terrain rules. So looking at the DBA rules, we have specified dimensions. So we have actual terrain can't be bigger than this or smaller than this. We also have terrain placement rules. Here. This is the terrain placement rules. So you have a lot of rules on how to create your terrain, how to place your terrain, how the terrain functions. In the Pike&Shotte rules, we have basically 5, I think, different types of terrain. You have woods, rough ground, obstacles, rivers, buildings, and impassable. And then just a short text of what counts as what and what effects it has on the game. For Battlegroup, we basically have this. An example of an Eastern Front battlefield. There are some terrain generation rules in the different source books, and for different special scenarios. So for city fighting, for example, then you have some special rules, but in general, since this is not a game that is written for competitive play, you have to decide with your opponent how to count or what to count the terrain as, while in DBA it's very defined, very clear what each type of terrain is and how it functions, but in Battlegroup not so much. What you also need to look at is DBA is a very two-dimensional game. So you are basically looking from the top downwards. But in the case of Battlegroup, or for example Killteam from Games Workshop, it's a very three-dimensional game. So the three-dimensional games require different types of terrain to play. Okay. So next up is budget. So do you want to make everything yourself? Do you want to buy laser cut MDF for everything? Me personally used to build all my terrain from scratch, like everything, all the houses, maybe not trees, but I have done that also. All my hills and stuff, all handmade. I have been transitioning to buying MDF houses, just because it's a bit simpler, but there is the trade-off with it's not really as detailed and not really my style all of the time. I tend not to go with the Games Workshop style with highly detailed terrain, because I think that is a bit out of place. So I try to find some kind of middle ground where when I buy, for example, MDF terrain. And also you have to think about what your plan is. Are you gonna be a tournament organizer, for example? Then you want a lot of really cheap terrain. Or are you making a gaming table for your gaming room and just making one table? Then you can... There's always this trade-off between money and detail that you have to balance. And it's also a trade-off between high detail and playable, because there is no point of making terrain that has so much detail so you can't play on it, really. You can't place miniatures where you want. That is, for example, a ruin. Usually ruins for tabletop miniature war games look quite clean, because you need to be able to place miniatures everywhere. But in reality it would be just a pile of rubble and stones and walls and stuff, but you can't really play on that. So there's always this trade-off between detail and playability. And I tend personally to go to a more playable style and try to make that as good looking as possible. So, talking about inspiration and resources, there are a couple of places I always look first. First of all, I look in the rulebook, because that gives me a sense of how the people who wrote the rules want the game to be played. So, for example, going back to this picture, they used this example for a reason. There is... it gives you a good overview of how they wanted it to be played. How much terrain do we actually need? So, yeah, we have a hill back here, a couple of roads, a couple of buildings, a field. So, take inspiration from the rulebook and the pictures in that, Since Battlegroup is a historical game, I also use pictures from the period. So here we have the Images of War series. We have German army on the Eastern Front, the advance. So just looking at this, you can get some inspiration. And then they also have books about, for example, Stalingrad. So you can look at that, and you can get inspiration from movies, TV series. Sometimes, if they are documentaries, is an excellent one. But also looking at what other people have built in the past. There are loads and loads of groups on like Facebook or just Googling terrain for a game that works excellently as an inspiration. So looking at building terrain for fantasy games, as an example, I grabbed the Frostgrave 2nd edition rules. I would start off, if I were to build a gaming table for Frostgrave, I would start off by reading the rules, reading all the terrain rules, trying to get a feel of how the author intended the game to be played. I would then go to, since Frostgrave is a very popular gaming system, I would do a couple of image searches on internet, because there are loads of people that have built terrain for this game. If I didn't really find anything there, I would go to, probably Frostgrave has a dedicated, well, it has terrain that you can buy for the game, so that is especially made for the game. So trying to get inspiration from there. Then you have your computer games. You can find inspiration in World of Warcraft, Diablo, League of Legends, Skyrim. Skyrim would be quite good for this, since this is in a frost world, just as Skyrim. If you were doing, for example, a post-apocalyptic, I would go to maybe Fallout, maybe looking at some movies like Mad Max or something like that. You can find inspiration basically anywhere. So just to sum up, start off by reading the rules for the game you're planning to build terrain for. Read the rules, read the terrain rules, try to figure out how the author intended it to be played. And then after that you can try to balance how much you want to build yourself. Basically the budget. How much terrain do you need? Do you need to make everything? Can you buy some things or buy everything? Yeah. Please comments and questions down below in the comments, and good luck with your terrain builds.